All right. Well, that's close enough to 9 o'clock. So, hello everyone. How's it going? I hope you guys are enjoying the first BSides St. Pete so far. How was the keynote?
Very good. Very good.
Nice, nice. So I hope he set the bar really low. That way the rest of us don't have to do it. So who am I? I'm Nicholas Carroll. So I am currently the head of threat intelligence team for Raytheon Cyber Protective Services. We do managed security services for a bunch of different companies. Do a lot of incident response, a lot of CTI kind of stuff. I work with a couple people in this room, so yay! You guys feel welcomed and called out?
I'm cool with it.
All right, good.
Permanent state of existence.
Yeah. Before that, I was the CTO and CISO at the Florida Department of State, doing a lot of election cybersecurity stuff. I've been kind of everything from help desk to CISO, and then I stepped myself back down a little bit because it's not as much fun at the top as you think it is. So, kind of moved back down from there to something that's a little bit more fun, engaging, a little bit more technical. You guys can connect with me on LinkedIn. It's up there. Just Google my name, or it should come up. I highly recommend that if you are interested in the stuff that we talk about today, to go and do that, because that's typically the place that I post and share. This slide deck, I'm going to post it there when I'm done. All right. The stuff that we're talking about today, a lot of it, some of it for you, it may be newer, but for a lot of you in this room, it's probably going to be preaching to the choir. Okay. And that's okay. We're bringing out different stuff. We'll talk about different stuff. But for a lot of organizations, the stuff we're talking about today, they haven't necessarily adopted it yet. Right? They're still a little behind the curve. They're moving that direction. And that's because the view from the top favors things that are quick and easy. And so when you start talking about this kind of stuff, maybe they're not really listening to you. I encourage you, if there's anything in this slide deck that's helpful to you, any infographics, anything you want, go to my LinkedIn and steal it. All right? Use it, put it to work. This stuff is for you guys to use and share and get out there, because the reality is that we're all a community. We're all in this together, except for the guys who are from Russia who are actively working against us. So what are we talking about today? Right? This title of this presentation is called "Chasing Cyber Theft." What we're really talking about today is the difference between IOCs and TTPs and kind of getting up the pyramid of pain, which I'm sure many of you at least have some familiarity with, right? So where we deal with IOCs, generally speaking, we're dealing with what we might refer to as reactive security, right? Indicators of compromise, for those who aren't familiar with them, are the kinds of things you typically see at the bottoms of blog posts from Cisco or CISO or somebody like that. It's literally file hashes for different strains of malware. It's the IP addresses that attackers have been using for their infrastructure. It's the domain names that they're using, right? There's other indicators of compromise. Those are the three most common. These are historical pieces. So when you get them from a blog post, you get them from whoever, you're dealing with something that has already happened, and you're going out and hunting for something that therefore has already happened. You're reacting, and you're not even necessarily reacting to your own incident. You're reacting to somebody else's incident, right? So these have a historical nature. And I'm going to badmouth IOCs. I'm just going to go ahead and say up front, though, that the reality is that these still have value. And the value is from a historical nature, right? The ability to look at what's been happening and how things are going, or how things have come from, so you can kind of look towards the past that way. But they don't help you get ahead of things. So one of the things that I think kind of leads to this reactive posture with IOCs is the NIST cybersecurity framework. Excellent framework, and if you don't have a framework, this is a great one. Or adopt the system control, whatever you want. There's a talk on the system controls later today, I think, and everybody should probably be in there. I love that stuff. You probably want to do it. Anyway, the NIST cybersecurity framework specifically calls out indicators of compromise. All right? So a lot of organizations that are looking to NIST read the thing and interpret it as it says on the page. So they see indicators of compromise. They generally think of an indicator of compromise as being a file hash, a domain name, something like that. And so they go, okay, that's how we are going to build our threat hunting program. So we're going to take all of these IOCs, put them into a CSV, a spreadsheet, whatever, hand it to our analysts and say, look for this. Because this cybersecurity framework says that that's what we're going to be looking for. And so that's how they build out the detect portion of their program, right? They're looking for these things. The problem is that when you're dealing with that, like I said, you're looking at something where you're thinking you're here to detect, right? And you're a baby in detect for you. But by the time you get the IOC, somebody else has already gone through the entire life cycle. They have gone from identify to recover. That's the point that the IOCs start coming out. So you're dealing with the fact that somebody else has already had to go through the whole cycle, and then you're going to start looking for it. That's not necessarily helpful for you, right? That's something where if somebody else already saw it and it's done, by the time you get it, you could already be done. So where do we go, right? The reality is where we should start to focus is what's known as tactics, techniques, and procedures. And there are many people who argue that tactics, techniques, and procedures are technically a type of IOC, and yada yada. But the reality is that most organizations, when they think of tactics, techniques, and procedures, they think of stuff like MITRE ATT&CK, right? The MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is a little bit of a newer concept in most organizations. The NIST Cybersecurity Framework version 1 came out in 2014 and was updated in 2018. MITRE began the research for the attack framework in 2013. They went to the feds with the first version of it in 2015. They went to the public with the first version, version 1, in 2018. 4 years after the NIST Cybersecurity Framework kind of already had time to take hold, right? So when people were thinking IOCs, they were thinking of these traditional items. And then MITRE comes out, and they continue to adapt the framework, and people continue to expand on it and grow into it and everything. But there's a 4-year window between when NIST dropped CSF and MITRE dropped version 1 for everybody else except the feds, right? So there's a gap there. And organizations that have been building their programs had already established the one, and now they're having to try to change their thinking, which is why many organizations are still at a point where they get a spreadsheet, CSV of indicators handed to an analyst and say, look for this. Instead of telling the analyst to say, look for what the attacker was doing that generated these. So let's talk about a quick case study. This one was in the headlines recently. Cisco, right? Cisco's not one of those names you usually want to hear get compromised. And it's one of those things too where I was following along with it, and it was announced on the ransomware operator's website. I constantly check these things with my job. And I was like, well, this is probably going to be garbage, because the Mandiant one from Lockbit earlier this year was junk. They're just making stuff up to sound cool. And then, the same day, Cisco turns around and drops a blog post like, oh yeah, so that was real. Sorry about that. So, August of this year, last month, Cisco had a compromise, right? They had an issue where an attacker was able to get in, and they were able to steal data. In fact, a couple of days ago, the attackers released the data they stole. And Cisco, a day later, was like, yep, it's real data, but it's not a major thing because they didn't get too far. But, it happened. It happened to them, and they breached it. Except, they were hit by a group called Yanglu Wang. Yanglu Wang is somewhat newer. They've been operating since the end of last year under that moniker. Realistically, the operatives who are working with this group have more experience than just them. They're potentially tied to some of the Lapsus operators, Five Hands, and a few other groups. They're most likely out of Russia for the ones that are working here. They've got experience, so they know what they're doing. And these groups change their names all the time anyway, so that they can avoid detections and stuff, which is part of the reason that IOCs tend to have some problems. But wait a minute. So I just said that Cisco had an incident in August, right? Not quite. That's a little bit of a wrong thing there. Cisco detected the incident in May. They released their blog post in August, the same day the operator dropped their blog post saying we own them. That's May to August, where the public was in the dark. Right? And no shame to Cisco. They did the write-up they did is amazing. I highly recommend you go find the Talos blog and read it. And the work that they obviously put in figuring out what went wrong and why was very involved. And that takes time, so I'm not going to fault them for that, right? The reality is they put in some good effort, and they got some good stuff done between May and August. But between May and August, the rest of us had no idea what was happening, or that anything had happened, right? So let's look at that timeline a little bit, right? So they say that the attacker was able to social engineer one of their employees, was then able to get on a VPN, went from the VPN to the Citrix environment, and eventually wound their way up to privileged access on the domain controllers before Cisco shut them down. That part I take a little bit of issue with because that's a little bit farther than I would hope someone would get in Cisco than anything else. But, I'm sure they probably, I don't know, maybe they were just doing it for fun. They were watching the guy the whole time, but it kind of seems like they didn't really get their detection until they had achieved the point of having privileged access to the domain controllers. Right? That's probably about the time that the flags, the sirens started really going off in Cisco's group. So that means that those sirens went off in May. That was the detection. But that means the incident was happening sometime before May 24th. Could have been April. Could have been earlier. We have no idea. They don't really detail that out for us. And it's hard to say necessarily in April, right? But we know at least that sometime before May 24th, somebody got owned and they got up to the domain controller level. May 24th, Cisco figured out something was going wrong. And then from May into June, Cisco started working on the eviction of that person from their environment. And they stated in the blog that they actually had to evict the person multiple times, but they kept trying to come back. So, before May, June, whole month of July, I don't know what was happening, probably some sort of incident response. They were probably writing up the employee who gave out their stuff via a social engineering attack. And then we get to August. On August 10th, the attacker drops their blog post. They immediately turn around and go to the media, which is, the new hotness for a lot of extortion groups to go out and run the bleeping computer and everybody else and, be like, look at us, we did something cool. And then Cisco drops their blog post with all of the IOCs. Now, they included TTPs in that, and that's awesome. But August, that's where we're at. So we've got a whole month of silence, a month of them probably doing something, a month where they detected it, months before that, we don't know how long. And then in September, it's continued to trickle on, right? The attacker just dropped the information that they stole. It's a couple gigs. It's not that big of a deal. It's like mostly they got stuff from their employee. But, interesting, right? So Cisco put out the blog post. They did a really good job of giving us a lot of TTPs and IOCs, right? But when you're reading that blog post, there's a lot of meat to process. It's a long page, okay? So you wind up jumping to the bottom where they've got this nice little list of IOCs that you can just copy and paste. And that's where a lot of organizations go when they start. Or they use the plugin that comes with their EDR where they can just copy and paste the stuff right into the tool from the page they're reading. Or they pull it into a CSV, or they get it from a feed or whatever. But by jumping to here, they have jumped somewhere between May and August, or earlier, in the timeline, and not something more recent. Okay? So that's 78 days at least between when the detection happened and when we all got the indicators from that detection. That's a good chunk of time. So there are concerns there. And when you're talking to management about this kind of stuff, these are the kind of things you need to kind of be thinking about how you're phrasing, right? What's your log retention time? In a lot of organizations, you have the ability to hit 90 days, 120 days of retention to get to the point where these IOCs would be detectable in your environment. Because most likely the attacker was using this stuff around that time and abandoned that infrastructure afterwards, but the minute they got burned, it's definitely gone. Right? The minute it's on a blog post, they're definitely not using it. Most likely they're not using it before the blog post comes out. So can you go back in time and pick up that this event occurred in your environment? You maybe saw this stuff talking to your computers around that time. Right? And this is the same thing that happens. It's not just Cisco, where we're talking 70 plus days between when the thing happens and when we know. If you guys follow the NCAS system from CISA or any of the other federal stuff, there's a lot of good IOCs and TTPs that come out of that on a regular basis. All of that stuff that you're getting is 3 months, 6 months, sometimes older by the time that it hits an alert and hits you. Okay? So again, do you have 90 days of retention? Do you have 120 days of retention? Can you go back to the point where an attacker was using this and it matters? There's a good chance maybe some of you do. You work in large organizations and you've got money to burn. In many organizations, that's not necessarily the case because storing this stuff gets expensive, especially if you're dealing with some sort of cloud solution where they're charging you extra for that. All right? So the IOCs, by the time you get them, you could have lost the logs. Right? That's concern number one. And yeah, when we go back and we look at it again, May to August, 78 days that you needed log retention for to make those IOCs most likely worth it to you. Potentially longer than that, because we have no idea before that point in May where they announced they had infection, how far things were actually happening, and where these IOCs came from. Was Cisco looking back 30 days when they pulled this stuff and did their investigation? Were they looking back 60 days? We don't know, because they don't tell us. The other big issue that you run into is the frequency of change of these items. Right? Indicators of compromise are constantly changing. You only have to look at virus total and how many new hashes are constantly popping up there from new detections and people throwing stuff out there to check to know that people are changing stuff all the time, because there's a billion different versions of something, and when you look at it, it's like, oh, it's still all Emotech. It's just every time they launch Emotech on somebody, they're recompiling so they get a new hash, they change stuff a little bit, and therefore they're trying to bypass the versions. Okay? So you also run into an issue where, all right, file hashes change all the time, and they're the easiest thing to change, most likely. Next up the line, IP addresses. IP addresses change all the time. Attackers are constantly going in and using and burning infrastructure from cloud solutions, from different providers, whatever they can get their hand on. So by the time you get that IP address, they're not using it anymore. It's now somebody's, art school blog. So are you going to detect somebody's art school blog? Go up to a domain name. You're more likely to see a domain name last a little bit longer, but even then, I can go on Namecheap and make a domain for $10 or less, depending on what I'm doing. Super cheap, super easy to burn. They're not holding on to this stuff. What they are holding on to is the tactics and techniques that they're using between items, right? If I use Emotech as my malware and I recompile it every time, Emotech in its actions on the system, the actions that I take to get it on the system, are most likely not going to change that much, even though the malware itself has. So let's take a look. I'm talking about the fact that age isn't the only concern, right? When you're looking at a lot of these IP addresses that come out on blogs and things, attackers really, really love hosted solutions. So this one's Vice Society and ransomware. Most likely they may be behind the recent LA ransomware attack for the school district out there. Vice Society loves schools. Like schools and hospitals and then like their jam. not the nicest people on earth. But CISA put out an alert, basically the same day that LAUSD announced that they were hit, on Vice Society. That timing is probably not coincidental, but it's probably because of that. But in that alert, they drop down and they give you some IP addresses that they have seen Vice Society use for command and control. They know that this one marked with high confidence. That's most likely definitely been used by them. Except that IP address belongs to the infrastructure group, a European hosting solution, which means that they went in, they got a VPS or some other system, they hosted their C2 there, and then they moved on. And that IP address now belongs to somebody else. This one, again, like Vice Society didn't go out and buy an IP address for themselves. Exeter data centers, hosting solution. They went out, they got themselves a VPS, they used it, and they burned it. Same thing. Blockhost from Canada. VPS. This one's a gaming hosting company out of Germany. But again, they do VPSs on the side. All of these IP addresses were in connection to Vice Society at some point. You don't necessarily know when. You just know you got the alert. You look for them to see if you communicated with anything. But by the time you're looking for it, is it still under Vice Society's control? Probably not, because these things belong in a giant network block that this hosting provider owns, and they're going to give it to the next guy. So some poor sap who went out and made a Minecraft server is probably getting blocked all over the place now. A really good one for this, if you guys are familiar, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with stuff like LOLBAS, GTFO bins, things like that, living off land concept. Living off trusted sites and services. Mr. Docs has made a really nice project for this. You can go out and steal it. It's on GitHub. Attackers are at a point now where they really like to use legitimate services. All of those VPS solutions that we looked at there, those are legitimate services. Anybody can go out and host a thing. And it most likely isn't going to be malicious. It's just only going to be malicious when somebody decides to be a jerk and they really like to run ransomware off of it. There are more solutions out there than just VPS systems, right? We've seen C2 via Discord, via Twitter. All of these systems, all of these cloud-hosted solutions are a channel of entry. I've seen so much phishing hosted via Dropbox, where they're sending you the link that way. Are you going to block Dropbox in your organization, right? That's something you have to start thinking about talking about. Which of these sites and services are we going to say our users are not allowed to use? Because they're a risk. And maybe you decide that Dropbox is an acceptable risk to block. But I would bet the people at the top are going to be like, no. I occasionally get stuff from my accountant in Sweden about all of my cool accounts, and it comes via Dropbox, or it comes via this bizarre service. So you can't block that, right? That's why attackers love this stuff. It's typically whitelisted by default, and the people at the top don't want you to turn it off. So they're going to abuse it. So then what are you going to do? Are you going to go out and look at the IOCs for Discord and occasionally block stuff from Discord CDN? That's so many IP addresses. It's ridiculous. You just can't work like that, or you'll constantly be running around like a chicken mantel. So, man, right on time. I could use that water. Oh, there you are. Did you just get here? Ladies and gentlemen, one of your 10 o'clock speakers, Mr. Chris Peacock, at about 30-ish minutes before his talk. Nicely done, sir. All right. So the reality is, though, that while these IOCs are constantly being refreshed and changing, and you're looking at stuff when you're looking at them that's a historical snapshot of something that happened in the past to somebody else, the attacker, when they come for you, is going to use the exact same techniques that they used against that organization, just from a different hosting provider, or from a different thing, right? They'll have different infrastructure, but they're not going to change the techniques that they use to get things done. Because everybody likes to follow the same procedures. If you look at Conti and a bunch of the big groups, they have written procedures for things for how you do it, right? The same kind of stuff that we should be doing in our defense side, where we're actually following through with our playbooks, and we're following our procedures, and we're writing that stuff out. Please write that stuff out for the next time. But you're following along with these procedures, right? Which means you're most likely going to be using similar tactics and techniques. You're going to use the same tools often. Sometimes you'll change them, but a lot of times they remain the same because you're going to follow along with what you know. Okay? So this stuff stays the same between campaigns. So if the TTPs are the things that stay the same and the other stuff changes a lot, what do we want to do? For one thing, when it comes down to IOC items, that's not really a good investment to spend analyst time on, right? Handing your analyst a spreadsheet of IP addresses and saying, go forth and do, is less likely to net you something worthwhile than handing your analyst a technique and saying, hey, look to see if we've seen anything like this lately. Or hey, we just had a pen test and they were able to do X. Please look for something similar or write a detection for it, right? Your analyst should be doing things that put them ahead of the game. All of these IOCs that are historical snapshots, these things that are looking at things that happened in the past, well, they're a great solution for automation. This is the point, to be using your tools and using them wisely. Most organizations and most tools that you buy have at least some capability to ingest a tax feed or restrict feed, something like that, right? These feeds are freely available for many organizations. Sometimes you can pay for nicer ones, but honestly, you can start with the free ones and get great response out of stuff. You can feed these into your tools automatically, and if it hits a hit, then your analyst can pick up that hit and say, okay, why did we get a hit? Are we getting a hit because somebody wanted to go look at the new Minecraft server that was made, or because we've got 120 days of retention and we can see back to when things actually happened that it was used by an attacker, right? That's great for automation. It's a terrible use of an analyst's time because analysts are expensive and we don't want them wasting their time on this stuff. So when we're talking about maximizing our investments in defense, you guys can call back to this. This is a classic thing, and I'm sure most of you have seen it at this point. This is known as the Pyramid of Pain. It came out from an author at SANS in 2013, so it's been around a while. Most people have seen it in some form or another. The guy who decided to walk in late is going to be giving a talk at 10 o'clock that kind of talks a little bit more about this, and I highly recommend it. If you're interested in this stuff, you should go see Mr. Peacock's talk on this. But where do you want to spend your time? Automation at the bottom, right? All of this stuff at the bottom is easy to get a feed, to pick it up straight into your Splunk, straight into your Sentinel, straight into your whatever, and let it roll. And then just, if something comes up, have an analyst deal with it then, right? But an analyst shouldn't be spending time copying and pasting or even going out and looking for this stuff. Because there are organizations that will feed it to you for free, like the ISACs, like CISA. Like, honestly, most of your vendors will have blogs and things that you can take advantage of this. You don't need to be spending time on it. And I've definitely seen organizations spend time on this when they should. Where you want your analysts is here at the top. This is the stuff that becomes harder to automate. And this is the stuff that's most likely to be constant. So your analysts can be looking for and writing detections for tactics, techniques, and procedures. Even if you just make it the tools, and you're getting detections done for tools, things like DFS course, curve relay, all that kind of stuff. If you're getting detections into these tools that these attackers are bringing in your organization and running, once you've got that done, it really feeds easily into looking at the actual techniques and tactics that are used and built off of those tools, right? These are foundational items. So you can work your way from there. But if you're down here, this is the point we want to automate. We want to jump up to at least tools and then start having our analysts do some work, right? Better if they can get to the top. This pyramid lumps tactics, techniques, and procedures into one thing. Realistically, tactics, techniques, and procedures are differing levels to handle amongst themselves, right? A procedure is very hard to write a detection for because you probably don't have the Conti playbook, except now we all do. But you probably don't have the attacker's playbook, so it's a little bit harder to know what they're doing there. But at least the tactics and techniques are fairly free-flowing these days. Even in that Cisco blog post, they didn't really necessarily have a lot of procedure level stuff, but they definitely had the tactics and techniques. And this is actually, what I mentioned Chris Peacock back there. This is breaking out this top piece and how to handle it. That's his whole title, most likely. That's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
All right, there you go. Go see that talk after this one. It's probably better than mine. So, let's look back at Cisco, right? Let's go into the meat of their blog post, and let's actually worry about what our analysts should be looking for. Because they gave us lots of great examples. Ignore the IOCs, let the automation handle it, and look at what they were doing here. So here's an example. They used the net tool, which is built into Windows, to add some users, to elevate the privileges of these users, and get some items done. If you're dealing with MITRE ATT&CK, software is net, techniques, account discovery, creation of account, and then tactics, privilege escalation, right? You can map that out and make yourself your own pretty MITRE ATT&CK map and show it to management. Like, look at the coverage we're getting on these things. We're building out and we're doing it ourselves. But this works amongst attackers. These IOCs, here, we call this an indicator of compromise. Multiple attackers are going to use this because it's built into Windows and they love it. They love built-in stuff, right? The flip side of this is where you need your analysts to look at the potential false positives on these items. Because while an attacker can use that, so can your help desk, right? So knowing what's real in your environment and how things should be going helps you tune out these systems. So if I know that my help desk uses net constantly to do stuff with file shares, I can be like, all right, we're just going to dump the file share stuff out from my detection, and I'm only going to focus on my net add, or my net local group or my net whatever, right? I'm going to focus on the pieces that an attacker might do that are not necessarily common in my environment, and that's where I'm going to focus my detection. I'm going to focus my analysts there. They can write that detection, they can spend time with it, and they can work it from there, right? Another great example that we're seeing right now, especially very common with a lot of stuff, is MFA spam. Because everybody was like, MFA is the answer to security, and it is one of the answers, but it is not the answer. And let's be real, user training has not caught up to the fact that we're all using MFA now, right? So what we see constantly happening, and this happened with Uber, they just have their poor Uber, they're sitting like lashed on Twitter right now, right? They're dealing with this. Same thing that's happened with Cisco. Same thing that happened most likely with Microsoft, Lapsus, and a bunch of other groups, right? You can go back and look at this. They're all doing this stuff. They'll get their hands on a legitimate user's credentials from a data breach or a dump, or they'll phish them or whatever, and then they get to the MFA point, and then they will just start spamming the ever-loving snot out of MFA requests until the user gets so annoyed with it that they click OK. Or in the Uber perspective, he kept spamming it. He then went on to WhatsApp, found the guy he was spamming it to, and said, hey, I'm from Uber IT. If you want that to stop, you need to click OK. And then the user clicked OK. I'm pretty sure Uber probably doesn't use WhatsApp for their help desk support. But hey, that's a user training issue. That's the kind of stuff we'd have to address at that point. But hopefully, you guys are doing exciting stuff and not necessarily that, right? But this works across attacks and across attackers no matter what. It's not necessarily something where they're going to change it because it keeps working and they're going to keep doing it, right? The IOCs might have changed. I guarantee you that if you were trying to look at the infrastructure that was used to compromise Cisco and the infrastructure that was used to compromise Uber, there's not going to be a lot of overlap. It's going to be two completely different circles. But that same exact technique and tactic worked. So they came back and they did it again. And they're going to do it to you. And that's why this is the point we need to be focusing on. Alright. So, yeah, alright, cool. Thought I smacked the thing that went too far. There we go. So let's talk a little bit about some of the ways you can get there. Okay? Because you're not alone in this. We're all working on this together. And I know that while a lot of vendors will try to tell you that their product is the best to get something done, the reality is that there's a lot of great stuff out there that's vendor agnostic that you can be using right now. And this is great stuff to take to your management too and be like, hey, I'd like us to look at these kinds of tools that are adding these kinds of things to our repertoire. If you're not familiar with it, I'm sure most of you in here are, go out to GitHub and look at the Sigma repository. All right? Sigma rules are vendor and scene agnostic rules that are written for detections as generic detections that you can go out and use in your scene technology today. A lot of them translate to EDRs as well. Right? Freely available out on GitHub. People are taking advantage of it. And honestly, writing your own Sigma rules and stuff is its own thing. You guys can get into that later. But just go steal what's there. There's detections for net. There's detections for all the stuff we're talking about out there already written. So all you have to do is go steal the rules, put them in place, and your job is kind of done. Right? You're going to be like analyst of the month just because somebody did the work for you. Even better, you don't even necessarily have to translate these things yourself. There is a script out there on the GitHub repo that you can use that will translate this between different teams. If you don't like doing that, and you're not necessarily comfortable with doing a lot of script work, there's a web-based tool called Uncoder. Sock Prime put it together. It's uncoder.io. You can literally take all of the stuff out of the GitHub repo, copy, paste, pick your scene, pick your EDR. If it can auto-translate it for you, it'll do it. And honestly, a good 75% of the time it gets it done. Especially if it's something like Splunk or NetWitness or QRadar or one of the major scenes. The bigger exception there tends to be with EDR solutions, because you have to have stuff that's system specific. And if you've got a network thing, it's not going to fly. But if you've got a system specific thing, it's probably going to give you a nice rule, something that you can take tomorrow, drop in, go, and then start your tuning from there, right? And you didn't have to put any real effort into doing this. Another nice thing to have is to go out and use the information sharing communities. The iStacks are great if you're in something that counts. Go out and use the stuff from CISA. While they say they're for critical infrastructure, they make their stuff freely available. It's for anybody who wants to steal it, go and get it. Why is my battery running low? I'm literally plugged into the wall. That's not good. No, whatever. So go out, join some of these communities, go out and steal from these communities. A lot of these systems will give you taxi and Strex items. Go out and steal them. And then the community itself, right? You guys are here connecting amongst yourselves today. Build your connections out. Join Discord groups. Join whatever and start talking amongst yourselves. Because if you're out here and you're trying to get something out of like Sigma, and you're like, man, I'm trying to work with this thing and it's being weird, or I'm getting a lot of false positives, there's probably someone who's encountered it before you and can give you some guidance on it. And that's where the community comes in. We're all in this together, and we're all working together on these items. So take advantage of it, right? We're all resources. All right. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about. You guys are at, we're a little bit past 40 minutes. Perfect. Are there any questions before my laptop apparently decides to die?
I got a question about, you mentioned a topic a couple of slides earlier about the living off land concept. If you could just elaborate a little more on that, like what that is and like what's that?
Okay. So, living off the land. Oh, that's why. It would really help if I actually plugged the cable from the wall into my power brick. There we go. Living off the land is a concept where an attacker doesn't have to bring tools to your environment, right? So you have a lot of sweet administrative tools in your environment already. You've probably got, you got SolarWinds, you got TeamViewer, you got whatever. You've got all the stuff that's built into Windows with PowerShell, all the stuff that's built into Linux. Just like an admin would do to do their job, an attacker can take all that stuff and weaponize it. Because it's a tool, right? So just like I can use a shovel to make a nice garden, or I can use a shovel to bury a body, it's just how I use that tool. Am I using that tool for good or for evil, right? If you're not familiar with them, I highly recommend looking up the LOTS project. It's on GitHub. It's got a really good collection of well-known items built into Windows and other item places where you can go and look to see, okay, who is abusing this binary in Windows by default, right? You can go out and get there. So when we look back here, oh goodness, let's go back to there we go. Living off trusted sites and services. Like you can look and see, okay, how are they using these sites and services? Are they using it for phishing? Are they using it for C2, right? That's some of the nice things about the LOTS project. GTFO bins, same concept but for Linux. Okay, how are they abusing, all of the items built into Linux? How are they disabling the firewall? How are they going through these items? There's also a newer one, I think Tiger made it, called WTF bins. And I highly recommend you look that one up too. WTF bins is stuff that tends to look malicious when you're hunting, but it's actually supposed to work that way. Because that's the way Microsoft or somebody else decided to do it. Right? These projects are great. They're freely available. Most of them are hosted via GitHub. You can literally just Google, bots or anything like that, you will find it. LOLBAS, go out and look from there. These are systems where you can look to see what people are bringing in. So, again, this plays back to the concept of what do we automate versus what do we look for. So, if we say that I have automations that are looking for a lot of the malware stuff, because I have an antivirus solution, I have an EDR, I have whatever, right? And it's automatically looking for new versions of malware as they come out. I, as an analyst, don't necessarily need to be looking for that. I need to be looking higher up to see, okay, if they didn't have to bring it into my environment, right? So back into Cisco, right? They didn't have to bring net to the environment. He just had to get access. As soon as he had access, he had the ability to go in and use net and add himself, make a user, add it to a local group, add it to a layer, start working his way up the chain from there. That's a tool that's built in, right? How will an attacker use these things that are built into the operating system, built into the environment, and how are they going to abuse it? That's your living off the land stuff. Any other questions?
I got another one. I'm sorry.
Okay, well, we're going to go here and then we'll go back here.
Pyramid primitive paint, familiar with it in general, but not really the specifics. For example, when you're talking about tools, you're not talking about the weaponizing tools where they create it in their own shop and then utilize it. You're referring to on your network what tools are there living off the land or
So the answer to that is yes.
Okay.
We're talking about both. So we are talking about the fact that you have these items that you can be on your network already that can be used, because those are tools you're using, and there's tools that the attacker will bring against you. We are also talking about the kinds of things that are pre-written by attackers to break your environment, like DFS coerce, right? So DFS coerce will do an NTLM or Kerberos relay attack in your environment, and it's basically a collection of scripts that the attacker is going to bring in, and they're going to run it. If they're not a well-seasoned attacker, they will probably have gone straight to GitHub, grab DFS coerce as a script right out of there, try to drop it on your machine and run. And so, easy detection, thing named this. Harder detection, how is it working, right? But you can start with the tools and just start with the basics, because there's so much stuff, there's so many script kiddies still. And even I've seen so many pen testers do pen test work, where they'll go and they'll just grab it straight off and GitHub and go, well, this is a neat new thing. I'm just going to copy it and run it, right? So they'll bring that tool as it lives on GitHub or as wherever they got it, straight to your environment and run it. And so you can have an easy detection for the tool itself. But then how the tool is operating is the next step up, right? So easy detection, name or hash or some sort of tool item, harder detections, how do you use the tool? Because, they can come in if they're good. They're not going to bring it to you as it's served on a platter on, the rest of the world. They're going to rename it. They're going to pack it in something else, or something like that. And that's where you're less necessarily looking for the tool, and you're looking for the technique or the tactic the tool is looking to abuse, right? So, but yeah, it's a mix. It's both.
Yeah, I'm just thinking as an analyst. I mean, the easy ones are the file hashes where they didn't change anything and you can easily get them.
Yeah.
The hard ones are going to be see anything inside the application was doing, unless you're doing like a registry dive or something like that. So,
yeah. And so what you're looking for is less necessarily, and this is where building stuff out tools becomes the easy part. You get the name, you get the whatever, you get the easy detections, but then you're looking for how the tool operates. And that's when things start pushing. Basically, you wind up, if you start looking here, you wind up pushing up anyway. Because once you've got the easy detections knocked out, you start pushing up into the tactics and techniques of how this operates, because that's what you're breaking down and going into, right? So if I wanted to look for in my environment something like, DFS coerce, I would be looking for, a general NTLM relay or Kerberos relay attack, right? I would be looking for golden ticket and pass the hash and that kind of stuff. Because that's the next expansion from just somebody bringing the tool. It's operating the tool. And so if I know that the tool operates and the end result of the tool is it's going to try to do X, I just need to look for X. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
You can back to you.
I kind of answered my question. So I figured I'd ask this a little, like that hash value, that bottom part of the pyramid, the hash value, what's that hash of? Like, what's that hash consist of? Like, what is it?
So when you go and you look at something like VirusTotal or another tool, right?
Malware hash, like a malware hash.
It's the malware hash. It's literally the hashes of the files and things they brought into your environment in like MD5 or SHA or whatever they're serving it up to. Right? But that's what the file hashes are. It's just the malware hashes. All right. Any other questions? Comments, complaints? All right. Very good. I appreciate you guys listening to me ramble. So, it's always kind of nice to get out and talk. I haven't gotten to do this since the pandemic started, so it's nice to get back out and do it. I'm glad to see that there's actually a bunch of people here. Sometimes when you go to a first-time conference, it's like you, and there's like one guy in the room, and you're like, man, we're going to get to know each other really well. So I'm glad to see that there's a good community and everything in this area. Outside of that, it's about 15 minutes. This is a perfect break point. If you want to come up and chat, come up and chat. If you want to go find the restroom and water before you go to the next place, please do that. Like I said, if you're interested in this stuff, and you're trying to kind of think about how your organization wants to shift or how you want to shift and move away from, IOCs and more towards TTPs, or how do you get to a point where you're actually summiting this, I do highly recommend that you go see Chris's talk 10, because that's his whole thing. It's breaking down the very top point of the pyramid, basically into another pyramid, and then working through how do you get up. All right.
Thank you.